So now what? I think that when you look at the North Wilkesboro Speedway, you see one of the greatest success stories and comeback stories in the history of motorsports. But it does feel like, at least from the TV audience side, which is where I was this year, that there's been a bit of tire spinning here. That some people are wondering why we brought it back, and some people are missing the overall big picture of the comeback of North Wilkesboro Speedway. And to kind of give a brief synopsis, 2023, well, it came back. It was a huge hyped up crowd. I was there in person. It was an amazing atmosphere and an amazing vibe and everything you want to say. 27 years in the making, and it was fully worth it. The race sucked, but we didn't care because North Wilkesboro was back and it was an amazing moment. Now this year, year two, I'd say a better race, not good by any means, but instead of a 1 or 2 out of 10, we had about a 4 out of 10 race. Something that was not necessarily a crime to humanity. And that's a really good improvement in the modern era of NASCAR short track racing, unfortunately. And we got a fight. So there's already something to add to the history of this great track without the racing necessarily being as good as it historically would or could be. But to me, and you've seen the title of this video, there is one direction that I think needs to be gone down when it comes to NASCAR and SMI's plans for this racetrack. North Wilkesboro Speedway needs a points race. Now, I get it. This sounds really dumb in hindsight of the last 2 races. Why would you add this to the schedule? Why? What races are they going to be taking the spot of? It would have to be an SMI race, and lately there's been some pretty good ones like Bristol and Atlanta and Charlotte. Why would you take away from that? And I get that. I get it, because the racing has not been good the last 2 years, but that's not the track's fault. And I think NASCAR should rather be ready more than try and have to react to when they eventually do get the short track racing figured out. This has been something historically, maybe not with short track racing, but other forms of racing in NASCAR that has had to be done, having to improve the overall base product from the start of a car. Don't get me wrong, I'm not happy about it either, but that's just how we're going with it. And I think there's cases for and against bringing North Wilkesboro back as a points race. And I want to talk about the ones that I see as a really good reason, and also kind of push back on the ones that say it's not a good reason. Let's start with the positive here. First off, there is a die-hard group of fans in Wilkes County. Fans who would wait almost 3 decades to bring back NASCAR racing to the historic facility. Fans that would fill up the place, yes, only about 20 to 30,000 depending on the event, but still would fill up the place that is generally seen as being in the middle of nowhere, has went through hurricane-level rain over this past weekend, and some pretty damn humid and hot temperatures last year as well. Overall, I think these fans deserve to be rewarded for all they've been given. And like I said earlier too, it's an atmosphere like no other. I'll never forget, after being caught up in traffic and coming in late to the truck race last year, walking up to the track and thinking I was walking into a picture from the 1980s or 1990s. It very much is like the first time I went to Darlington. You just understand that where you're going is bigger than you, and more important, even if the NASCAR world and world at large has grown larger around it than when it was initially brought up to the Cup Series. And I love seeing that. History and the connection to the old base is something that has been lost in a lot of aspects of NASCAR. And I think this is a great olive branch to give to people. Yeah, NASCAR fans are going to complain about everything, whether it's warranted or not. That's just going to happen. But I think that having something like this and then teaching younger and newer fans about the history of the sport and hopefully improving the racing, I think would actually be really, really good for NASCAR. Plus, it's close to home for the teams. Teams have talked in depth about how they don't like how long the NASCAR schedule is, how long they're away from home, and how few bye weeks there are compared to years past. For instance, when I started watching NASCAR back in 2005, it seems odd to the modern fan to hear this, but there were actually 3 bye weeks a year. Usually there was one after the second race out in California. Then after that, there was one on Easter, and then they had a small summer break bye week. And then we've went to 2 over the past decade or so, and recent years we've seen them go mostly just to 1 bye week a year, and that seems to be where they're going next year. And yeah, the NASCAR schedule has always gone from February to November for a good part of its modern era. But if you look back, say at the 80s, there were around 30 or so races a year and multiple bye weeks more than even in 2005. So I can understand where the teams are coming from. So keeping more races close to that North Carolina area, while maybe not helping with attendance necessarily over time because of the oversaturation, could help at least with burnout for the teams and team members. Maybe instead of having 3 or 4 bye weeks that hurt TV ratings, you have a long stretch of races where these teams and their drivers and everyone around them get to sleep in their own beds every night, even right before a race itself. That could be a good compromise, maybe. Now, there are those who are very much against this, and I understand these points. First off, the racing is atrocious. Where I would push back on this is that the racing in general at short tracks is atrocious. Nobody in their right mind, or at least it's not shilling for the sport, would say that this racing has been good at short tracks or improved over the Gen 6 era. I would say that overall, because the short tracks are suffering, North Wilkesboro should not be punished as harshly as, say, a Phoenix, who has always been bad. I think that when the racing improves, this point can really be washed away, and we'll see the true one-to-one comparison between, say, this and Richmond, Martinsville, Bristol, or Iowa, the other short tracks, or even, I guess, Bowman Gray if you want to add them in. Also, hype does tend to die down for new events. We saw it with Road America. We've seen it with the Bristol Dirt Race, with the Clash at the Coliseum. It's just difficult to get that second year pop. And we'll see probably something similar with the Chicago Street Race. It's just the natural way of new events once they've had a year or so to marinate. And this is, I think, a really big point as well. While those in person are really hyped up about it and loved it, it did seem like something was a little missing for those of us who were watching at home or away from the track. How do you improve the hype or bring it back to where it was? I think great racing is a good start, or a points race to at least kind of stall out that die down until the racing is improved a little longer. I think that another thing people will look at is that TV ratings will be bad. They were bad for the 2023 All-Star race, and in general, they're bad for all-star races and short tracks alike. This is the business sense that I think Fox or Prime or TNT or NBC, depending on where it would go in the schedule, this is what they're going to bring up, and this is what fans need to fight against. Especially if it gets better. If you want short track racing on the schedule, show up and watch it. And I think that when it comes to in-person, the location is near basically all other short tracks when you look at the general state geography of NASCAR tracks, and also is kind of in the middle of nowhere when you look at the surrounding area more on the micro level. Overall, I think that it's going to be a hard sell at the moment, just because the racing on these short tracks is completely and consistently bad, and it needs to be improved, I think, to get the majority of fans on board. But I do think that they're on the right track. The tire seemed like it was better, just when it's a night race, it's going to be more difficult for the tire to make a bigger difference with cooler temperatures. And on top of that, I do think that the repave actually did a relatively good job with maybe preserving some of the great racing we could see from this track for years to come. I do have hope. But with that, I want to pass it on to you. Do you think North Wilkesboro should be getting a points race, or is it just not time for it yet, or will it never be time for it? So let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for continued support, and until next time, have a good one.